Hi everybody, I hope that you're all doing well. So for the more eagle-eyed among you, you might be able to notice that we've had a little bit of a reshuffle behind me, a cabinet reshuffle if you will. So my parents decided that they wanted to make a little bit of a change. They wanted to install some fitted furniture, some fitted wardrobes into our spare bedroom. However, that has meant that they have had to redistribute all of the current furniture that was in that room around the house. Most of it has gone into the garage. However, there was a little bookcase that was in that bedroom, which I have now adopted. And you can see, it's there. Oh, look at it. Look how cute it is. And I did quickly want to point out, I've not gotten rid of my book trolley. She's there, she's behind the door. She's very happy, she's holding my TBR for me. So yeah, I had a little bit of a rearrangement of the bookcases. I basically decided to put all of my history books on the new little bookcase, which meant there were some free shelves here. And then I basically just did a switcheroo of the top two shelves here. So I used to have all of my hardback fiction on this side and all of my classics on this side. We've swapped them around, which means that all of my general fiction lives on the same bookcase, so, which is probably a change I could have done anyway without the addition of the new bookcase, but it's all done now. And then I've got all my classics together and then my black classics on the bottom shelf, which you can't really see. So it's really nice because it means there are some spare shelves on pretty much all of these bookcases. So I've got room to grow in history, I've got room to grow in my general fiction and room to grow on this shelf with my classics and my general non-fiction. So that was an unexpected treat that I got this week. So I feel like over the last couple of weeks, the conversation around rereading has been a real hot button topic on BookTube. I've seen quite a few people talking about specific books that they want to reread. I've seen people having discussions about rereading. The reread book tag has just emerged and lots of people are doing it. So as somebody who is quite an advocate of rereading books, I wanted to hop in on the conversation. So today I'm going to talk about some of the books that I really am keen to reread. I do think basically every book that I read, I end up thinking at some point, oh, I really want to reread that. But as you can see, there's a lot of books behind me and that would take a lot of time to do. So I've curated a little selection of books that I am really, really keen to reread. And I feel like they can kind of be split up into books that I read in high school and books that are kind of like my big favourite books of all time. I do want to eventually get around to rereading all of the books that I've ever said are my favourite books of all time, just because I've never compared any of them against each other, and I would at some point like to do my top 10 favourite books of all time list, but I never feel like I can properly, confidently do that list if I don't know how all of these books compare against each other. I don't know. There's a part of my brain that really wants to quantify that in my head. As I've said in the past, I went through a 4-year period where I barely read books in secondary school. It was particularly during my GCSE and A-level time. However, that wasn't to say that I didn't read any books during this time, but I feel like because I wasn't reading very much, my reading comprehension was really low. So any of the books that I did read in that time, I just don't think properly sunk in. And the first of those books is The Handmaid's Tale by Margaret Atwood. This is the very, very popular dystopian fiction about the world of Gilead, where a mysterious illness has in previous decades swept across the nation, leaving only a small percentage of women fertile. These women are basically just whittled down to their breeding capacity and sent off as handmaids to wealthy couples who were unable to have children. This was a book I read in my last year of school. Basically, we were allowed to do our coursework on 3 books of our own choice, and I think I did this, A Streetcar Named Desire, and The World's Wife by Caroline Duffy, and I was meant to be writing this essay all about how women are portrayed in those books. As I said, I didn't really read much for fun. I didn't really read much at all in this time period aside from for school, and even the stuff that I read for school, I didn't always do as thorough a job as I probably could have done. And this was definitely a book that I kind of skim read just to kind of get by with my coursework. I know the bare bones plot, I know the themes, but I really cannot remember properly sitting down and reading this properly cover to cover. And I've always kind of put off actually rereading it because I feel like it's a book where I like the idea, I like the concept, but I don't know if I'd actually like the book itself. I feel like it's a little bit odd to say I like the concept of this book. I don't like the actual world, I don't endorse the world or the concept, but I like the idea of writing a book with this concept being discussed. I'm not advocating Gilead, no. I like the themes of this book and the discussion that it's trying to have more than I think I'll like the execution of it. Everybody was talking about it a couple of years ago with the TV show coming out, and that could have been the time that I reread it and just something was holding me back. But I don't know. I do eventually want to get around to rereading this. I just don't know when that's gonna be. Another book that I read in school that I would quite like to reread is Wicked, The Life and the Times of the Wicked Witch of the West by Gregory Maguire. Now, if you know me, you'll know I'm a massive, massive fan of musicals, and I would say that as a teenager, Wicked was really the musical that got me into musicals. I'd always, watched Disney films, and, I liked Annie and Oliver as a child, but I think Wicked was the musical that cemented that stage theatre, musical theatre, is a big passion of mine. Wicked is meant to be a prequel to The Wizard of Oz, telling the true story of the witches of Oz, Glinda the Good, and also the Wicked Witch of the West, or Elphaba as she is named in Gregory Maguire's novel. As is the want of any obsessive fan, I always knew that I wanted to go back to the original source material of the musical, and I knew that Wicked the book was meant to be very, very different from the musical. The musical is meant to be a lot more like happy, sing and dance, and the book is much more grisly, much more politically leaning. One of my friends from secondary school knew that I was a massive fan of Wicked, and she was a big fan too, and I remember she got me this copy of Wicked for my birthday, and it is a very old copy, like there's peeling here. It's been well loved and read. However, I do think at the age of 15 I wasn't really that aware of a lot of the political discussions that were happening in this book. I think a lot of it just kind of flew over my head, and I hear so many people talking about themes in Wicked, and I'm just like, well, I read that, but I don't remember that. I also know that Gregory Maguire wrote a few sequels to Wicked from other people's points of view, which I think were less well received, but it'd be interesting to go back to this world and see if this resonates with me a lot more this time round. On the same musical theatre theme, we have Phantom of the Opera by Gaston Leroux. I read this when I was about 16, 17, I think is when I got into the Phantom of the Opera musical, and once again wanted to go back to the original source material, which, is fairly similar to the musical. There are some major differences, but I remember quite enjoying this. But once again, I think my reading comprehension was just down, and it just didn't click with me quite as much as the musical did. I remember reading this on holiday and being entertained, but just not really grabbed. So once again, I want to go back to this and see if I love it just as much as the musical. And for anybody who is a fan of Phantom of the Opera, I'd love to know who your favourite casting choices were. I'm a very, very big fan of the 25th anniversary with Ramin Karimloo, Sierra Boggess and Hadley Fraser as the Phantom, Christine and Raoul. I know a lot of people like the film. I'm not a big fan of the film. Why did they cast Gerard Butler as the Phantom when he can't sing? I don't know. That's a question that is going to haunt me for the rest of my days. But people love that movie, and they think that Gerard Butler is the best Phantom ever, and I don't get it. I don't get it. A book that I've talked about on my channel before as being enforced by my teachers and me absolutely despising it for a very long time. I think I said that this was my least favourite book of all time. It is The Road by Cormac McCarthy. I feel like The Road is just a very Marmite book. There are so many people who, like me, had to read this for school and absolutely detested it, found it so pretentious, found the fact that there's no punctuation in here just infuriating. But then there are other people who are like, this is the most profound book of all time. And like I say, I think there is a part of me that thinks, because my reading comprehension was down, that I just must not have got it. And, if I reread it, then it will click and it will be this big, profound book and not this big, pretentious, horrible book that was inflicted upon me by my teacher. And also because we read this as part of our dystopian fiction module that we did for sixth form, and I've gone back and reread 1984, which was another book that at the time I don't think quite clicked with me, but I've gone back and read it and really loved it. So I feel like this might happen. It might happen, but I don't know. I don't know if it's worth it. Starting to veer more into books that some of my favourites that I want to reread. We have To Kill a Mockingbird by Harper Lee. This, along with another book on this list, was one of the first books that I read when I decided to get back back into reading, and I remember really enjoying this. I think a large part of my love of this book was how much I loved Atticus Finch. I think he is one of the best characters and like the best father character in fiction, and I loved watching Gregory Peck as Atticus Finch in the movie adaptation of To Kill a Mockingbird, so I feel like that's why this book had such a special place in my heart when I read it. However, it's been a good like 6 years since I read To Kill a Mockingbird, and I don't know if my opinion of it will have changed, and I'm a little bit worried about picking it up again in case I don't like it. And I haven't actually read Go Set a Watchman, which was meant to be like the unofficial sequel to Kill a Mockingbird. I think I was on holiday at the time, and then I started to see all of the negative reviews popping up about it, and so many people saying that to Go Set a Watchman absolutely killed Atticus Finch as a character and made him really dislikable and go against all of his original beliefs. And I don't know, I think that has also slightly tainted my view of To Kill a Mockingbird, even though I've not actually read Go Set a Watchman. I'm sure you can kind of relate to this feeling of not wanting to taint a book by a reread, and I'm just worried that that would happen if I pick this up again. But I just remember being so moved by this book when I initially read it that I didn't know. We'll see if I pick this up again. In a similar vein, we have The Book Thief by Markus Zusak. I have spoken, I think, fairly recently about this book and how this was the first book that I read in 2014 when I was making my decision to read more. And this just hit me really hard, and for a very long time I considered this to be my favourite book of all time. The only reason that I don't really call it that now is because I never went back and reread this, and it basically, my image of this book as it was in 2014 is still very much what is in my mind now. I don't know if this would hold up on a reread. And I've heard so many people on BookTube since saying, oh, this book is overrated, it's not as good. And I feel like I'm usually quite good at being able to filter out opposing views of books. But I think especially when it is a book that you consider your favourite, it just kind of sticks and it stings a little bit more. And I'm really scared to reread this in case it isn't as fantastic as I remember it. I think also because it is quite a long, chunkier book, that's always put me off rereading it again. I don't know if maybe I found an audiobook, maybe that would work, or I don't know. I will reread this at some point. At some point I want to do some sort of video where I reread all of my old favourites and then kind of work out my rankings of them and whether or not they do hold up. But I don't know. I don't want to ruin this for myself. This one would hurt the most if I didn't like it as much a second time round, so holding it like a baby. A little double act that I would quite like to read back to back are The Secret History by Donna Tartt and If We Were Villains by M.L Rio. Both of these books I absolutely love. They both tell the stories of quite obsessive, quite pretentious university students who are very much stuck in their own little academic bubble, and a mystery surrounding a murder that takes place within that friendship group. The Secret History was the original of these books, and If We Were Villains is definitely paying homage. The difference between the two is that in The Secret History the students are studying like classical civilization, ancient Greece. I don't think ancient Rome, I think it is just ancient Greece, but I could be wrong. Correct me, it's been a few years since I read this. And then in If We Were Villains, they are Shakespearean actors, or training to be Shakespearean actors. And like I say, I remember absolutely loving both of these books. I don't think I'd be rereading them worried that my love of them would change. I just kind of would like to confirm in my head which one of the two is my favourite. I know there is a bit of debate back and forth within the BookTube community, and I know, like, technically, I know that The Secret History is the better book. I know it is better written. I know that, you know, this is the standard to which all like dark academia is held. However, when I think about it, I feel like I enjoyed If We Were Villains just a little bit more. And I think a large part of that is because of what they are studying. They are studying to be Shakespearean actors. And I feel like I just understand these characters a little bit more and their obsession a little bit more with Shakespeare than I do with classics. I know that recently Emma from Drinking by My Shelf has recently said how much she hated this book, and she would urge everybody to read The Secret History more because she found these characters to be way too pretentious and unbelievable because they are constantly like quoting Shakespeare back and forth to each other. And I made a comment to her saying, I am so sure that I've done that with my friends, because this was very believable to me because, you know, I've done like musical theatre society, I've done theatre society at university, I I know these people. I know people who quote Shakespeare back and forth to each other. Like, it's not unbelievable to me. And I think because I understand these people, they are actors, I understand where their obsession comes from. I think I hold them in slightly higher regard, and I have more of a fondness for If We Were Villains. But I think if I give these books a reread, then that might help confirm it a bit more. I mean, both of these books were 5 stars. It's just which is like the 5+ for me is what I'd be confirming in my mind. Instead of talking about individual books, I also wanted to mention an author's work who I really, really want to reread everything that they've written, and that is, of course, Jane Austen. I really want to go through these books and do a similar thing as I want to do with The Secret History and If We Were Villains. I basically want to confirm in my head my ranking of Jane Austen, because I've never read Jane Austen back to back, so I feel like I can't confirm where my order is until I do that. Just to give you my rundown of my Austens from bottom to top, I would say bottom, Sense and Sensibility, then Mansfield Park, then Persuasion, this is not very sound, then Northanger Abbey, then Emma, and then my favourite being the classic Pride and Prejudice. However, saying that, I also think maybe Persuasion and Mansfield Park could interchange, because I feel like I had stronger feelings for Mansfield Park and like lingering opinions on Mansfield Park, whereas Persuasion I kind of read and was like, yeah, that was good. That was a good book. I feel like Persuasion is due a reread because I haven't had lingering thoughts about it. It hasn't stuck in my head, and it's also the only Jane Austen, of the main 6 novels of Jane Austen, where I've never watched an adaptation of it, so the story is not as fresh in my head as I think it is for the other books. So, I'd quite like to reread them and then sort the order and the rankings in my head. I don't think Emma and Pride and Prejudice will change. I think they will pretty much stay top for me, but these other 4 could very much change. And whilst we're talking about Jane Austen and Pride and Prejudice, I also should definitely throw in that I do want to reread The Other Bennet Sister before too long. This has been my favourite book so far this year. This was such a lovely comfort read that I read back in February, I think, and I love it, and I want to reread it. But I also don't want to ruin it for myself because I have just such a lovely untainted view of this. This is Pride and Prejudice as told from the perspective of Mary Bennet. It tells the initial story that we know of Pride and Prejudice and then extends a few years further, and it's just a delightful, delightful book, and I do need to reread it very, very soon. And if you are a Jane Austen fan and you haven't read this yet, please, please do. It is so, so good. And the last book that I really, really want to reread at some point, but who knows when, because this is a monster of a book. It is the largest book that I've ever read. It is Les Miserables by Victor Hugo. Once again, appealing to my musical theatre love. I adore Les Mis, and when I did initially read it in 2017 was just like this momentous occasion. I'd finally gotten round to reading Les Mis, and I was so proud of myself. However, that was a good month of solidly working on this book, like every day having to read at least 50 pages to make sure that I read it by the end of the month. And it was enjoyable. I really loved doing it. It was an odyssey, and I'm so glad that I read it. But I don't know if I can put myself through it again. It is one of those things where you just think, can I be bothered rereading this book when there are so many other things that I want to read, and I know that this is going to take me forever to do. But I do want to reread it. I love Les Mis. I love this story so, so much. So eventually we will get around there. I don't know, maybe we should do like a readathon. I don't know who is gonna wanna read this with me. I also would quite like to read this edition, because the one that I read initially was this Everyman's Library, whereas this is a slightly different translation. The Everyman's Library was translated by Charles E. Wilbur, and the Penguin Deluxe Classic was translated by Christine Donahue. Okay. Because I'd had my eye on this edition for years and years and years, and then when the BBC adaptation came out, I finally just kind of cracked because I was in such a Les Mis headspace, but I've never actually picked this copy up and read it, so one day we will get there. Who knows when. But yes, those are the, I think 10 or 11 books that are most strongly in my mind as books that I want to reread. Who knows if I will actually get round to rereading them, but you know, the intention is there. I'm a really big advocate for rereading books, and I always kind of disagree with people who say that there's no point to rereading. I think you can get so much out of a book the second time round, and especially reading things a few years after you initially read them, so much more perspective and context that you might not have necessarily had the first time. However, I can completely understand that a lot of people kind of shy away from rereading because it feels like a waste of time when there are so many other books that you could be reading. We are never going to be able to read every single book in the world. We're not even going to be able to read like a tenth of what is published in one single year. So it feels like you should constantly be moving through new things. I remember somebody saying on a podcast that what they like to do is they will very quickly read through a book the first time, and then they will go back and reread it immediately, and then they'll be able to pick up on things that they didn't the first time round. They read the first time for the plot, and then the second time they're able to really delve into like the character development and the writing style. And I love that as a concept because I think what holds me back from a lot of books, especially like literary fiction, is me trying to work out what's going on the first time round, that I don't necessarily appreciate everything that's going on around the plot. Though I don't know if that is something that I will ever properly put into practice, but we'll see, we'll see. Do let me know what are some books that you are really keen to reread, and books that you do reread on the regular. I'd love to hear from you. I hope that you are having a fantastic, fantastic day, and I look forward to talking to you again soon. Thanks, bye!